Southeast Asia is, a vast and vibrant region, a sprawling collection of peninsulas and archipelagos nestled right between the giants of India and China. It's home to 11 distinct countries, each with its own unique character and story. Here you'll find sprawling nations like Indonesia, a nation of thousands of islands, and Vietnam, with its long, serpentine coastline. You'll also discover the powerful kingdom of Thailand, the diverse archipelago of the Philippines, and the culturally rich lands of Myanmar. These larger states share the region with smaller, yet equally significant nations such as Malaysia, Cambodia, Laos, the modern city-state of Singapore, the Sultanate of Brunei, and the newly independent Timor-Leste. Despite their modern borders and the incredible diversity of their cultures, languages, and traditions, these countries are bound by a deeply interconnected and honestly, often turbulent history that stretches back for millennia. For centuries, this part of the world has been a dynamic crossroads, a meeting point for ancient trade routes and successive waves of migrating peoples. The seasonal monsoon winds, which dictated the rhythm of life and commerce, carried ships laden with goods from distant lands, turning the region's ports into bustling hubs of exchange. It was a place where precious spices and shimmering silks were traded as freely as powerful ideas and profound religious beliefs. This constant flow of goods, people, and philosophies created a complex and layered cultural landscape. The history of Southeast Asia is not the story of isolated nations, but rather a grand interwoven narrative of shared experiences, where empires rose and fell, leaving their indelible marks on the societies that followed. This intricate web of relationships has been shaped by centuries of interaction, sometimes peaceful, often violent. The region has witnessed the rise of magnificent empires whose influence stretched across vast territories, their legacies still visible today in breathtaking temples and ancient ruins. It has endured the painful era of European colonization, a period that carved up the land into new political entities and sowed the seeds of modern nationalism. It has been a battleground for devastating wars, both internal and external, that have reshaped its political map time and again. Through all these upheavals, the peoples of Southeast Asia have forged their own identities, adapting and transforming outside influences to create unique and resilient cultures. This journey through time will explore the complex web of connections that define Southeast Asia. We'll trace the rise and fall of great empires and kingdoms, examining how they interacted through trade, diplomacy, and warfare. We'll delve into the era of colonization, understanding how foreign powers redrew the map and how local populations resisted and ultimately fought for their independence. Finally, we'll look at the modern era, marked by the formation of new alliances, most notably the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. This exploration will reveal how centuries of conquest, cultural diffusion, and political struggle have shaped the borders, the diplomacy, and, honestly, the very soul of the region today, creating a tapestry of incredible richness and complexity. The story of Southeast Asia is really a story of echoes, where the past reverberates strongly in the present. The ancient rivalries that once pitted kingdoms against one another can still be felt in the diplomatic tensions of the 21st century. The cultural and religious fault lines that were established 1,000 years ago continue to influence contemporary society and politics. The arbitrary borders drawn by colonial administrators a little over a century ago are, even now, the source of ongoing disputes and nationalistic sentiments. To understand the Southeast Asia of today, its partnerships, its conflicts, and its aspirations, one must first understand the deep historical currents that have carried it to this point. This exploration is not just an academic exercise, it's a vital lens for comprehending one of the world's most dynamic and strategically important regions. Our journey begins long before the modern era, in a time when the region was a vibrant cultural crossroads. We'll see how the predictable monsoon winds allowed merchant ships to sail between India and China, making Southeast Asia an essential stopover point for global trade. As goods were exchanged in bustling port cities from Sumatra to Siam, so too were world-changing ideas. We'll witness the peaceful spread of Hinduism and Buddhism from the Indian subcontinent, influences that inspired the construction of magnificent temple complexes like Borobudur in Java and Angkor Wat in Cambodia. These monumental structures stand as silent, awe-inspiring testaments to the Indianization of early Southeast Asian elites and their ability to blend foreign concepts with local beliefs. We'll then move forward through the centuries to explore the rise of powerful indigenous kingdoms and the intense rivalries that defined their relationships. This was an era of constant flux, where mighty empires like the Khmer of Angkor and the maritime power of Srivijaya gave way to new ambitious states. We'll examine the competitive dynamics between the kingdoms of Burma and Siam, the southward expansion of the Vietnamese state, and the rise of the great Majapahit Empire in Java. It was a time of frequent warfare, but also of constant cultural exchange, as victorious kingdoms often absorbed the artistic traditions, technologies, and administrative practices of those they conquered, creating a rich syncretic heritage that persisted for generations. Finally, we'll reflect on Southeast Asia's journey toward a more unified future as a regional bloc. We'll consider how the shared, often painful, experiences of colonialism and war ultimately fostered a desire for cooperation and stability, leading to the creation of ASEAN. This association has transformed former adversaries into partners, creating a platform for dialogue and peaceful conflict resolution. As the region navigates the complexities of the 21st century, facing the pressures of global superpower competition and shared challenges like climate change, we'll ask what lies ahead. Can this diverse collection of nations forged in the crucible of history truly act as one, securing a future defined not by division but by collective progress and shared prosperity? Long before the drawing of modern maps or the raising of national flags, the diverse lands of Southeast Asia were intricately connected by a powerful invisible force, the monsoon winds. These predictable seasonal winds were the engine of ancient maritime trade, creating a reliable superhighway for sailors and merchants. For half the year, the winds blew steadily from the southwest, allowing ships to sail eastward from the Indian subcontinent and the Arabian Peninsula into the heart of the region. For the other half, the winds reversed, blowing from the northeast, enabling a smooth return journey and carrying vessels onward to the great markets of China. This cyclical weather pattern transformed Southeast Asia into a natural and, honestly, unavoidable meeting point, a grand central station of ancient global commerce and a crucible of cultural interaction. The ports that dotted the coastlines of Sumatra, the Malay Peninsula, and the shores of the Gulf of Thailand became bustling, cosmopolitan centers of exchange. Here, sailors would often wait for months for the winds to change, creating semi-permanent communities of traders from across the known world. In these vibrant marketplaces, a dizzying array of goods changed hands. Silks, ceramics, and teas from China were bartered for fragrant spices like cloves, nutmeg, and mace from the Moluccas, the legendary spice islands of eastern Indonesia. Precious metals, aromatic woods, and exotic animal products from the Southeast Asian hinterlands were traded for Indian textiles, glassware, and beads. The region was not merely a passive conduit for this trade. It was an active and essential participant, its own products and resources becoming highly sought-after commodities in a burgeoning global economy. This constant movement of people and products did more than just enrich local rulers and merchants. It fundamentally shaped the societies that emerged along these trade routes. The port cities became melting pots where different languages, customs, and technologies mingled and merged. Seafaring techniques were shared, new agricultural products were introduced, and administrative systems were adopted and adapted. The wealth generated from this trade allowed powerful maritime states, such as the Srivijaya Empire based in Sumatra, to rise and dominate the strategic sea lanes, like the Strait of Malacca. Their control over this critical choke point ensured their prosperity and influence for centuries, demonstrating how deeply the region's political destiny was tied to its role as a commercial crossroads. The economic interdependence fostered by the monsoon trade laid the very first foundations for a shared regional identity. While the peoples of Southeast Asia remained diverse in their local customs and languages, they were united by their participation in this vast network of exchange. A merchant in a port in Borneo might be trading with the same Indian or Chinese counterparts as a merchant in Siam, using similar currencies and abiding by unwritten yet widely understood commercial codes. This shared economic reality created a sense of a common world, a sphere of interaction that transcended the authority of any single kingdom. It was this ancient network, driven by the timeless rhythm of the winds, that first wove the disparate threads of Southeast Asia into a single, interconnected tapestry. As merchant ships sailed the monsoon winds, They carried a cargo far more transformative than spices or silks. They carried ideas, philosophies, and religions that would profoundly reshape the cultural and spiritual landscape of Southeast Asia. Beginning as early as the first few centuries of the Common Era, a powerful wave of cultural influence flowed from the Indian subcontinent into the region. This process, often referred to as Indianization, was not a conquest of armies but a peaceful and gradual adoption of Indian concepts by the local ruling elites. They were drawn to the sophisticated systems of statecraft, law, art, and religion that India offered, seeing them as powerful tools to enhance their own prestige and legitimize their authority over their subjects. Hinduism and Buddhism were the two great faiths that journeyed across the Bay of Bengal, and their impact was, honestly, monumental and enduring. Local rulers adopted Hindu concepts of divine kingship, styling themselves as Devarajas, or god kings, and embracing epic tales from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, which were integrated into local folklore and artistic expression. Similarly, various forms of Buddhism found fertile ground, offering pathways to enlightenment and a moral framework for society. This religious diffusion left its most spectacular legacy in the form of architecture. Across the region, rulers sponsored the construction of magnificent stone temples, not merely as places of worship but as symbolic representations of the cosmic order and their central place within it, their power divinely sanctioned. The grand temple complexes of Borobudur in central Java and Angkor Wat in Cambodia stand as the most breathtaking testaments to this era of Indianization. Borobudur, built in the 9th century, is a massive Buddhist stupa designed as a three-dimensional mandala, guiding pilgrims on a spiritual journey towards nirvana. Its stone walls are covered in thousands of intricate narrative reliefs depicting Buddhist teachings. Centuries later, in the 12th century, the Khmer Empire constructed Angkor Wat, initially as a Hindu temple dedicated to the god Vishnu, representing Mount Meru, the mythical home of the gods. Later converted to a Buddhist site, its sheer scale and the sublime beauty of its carvings reflect the immense power and spiritual devotion of the Khmer kings who built it. Crucially, this process of Indianization was not a simple act of imitation. Southeast Asian societies did not become pale copies of India. Instead, they were highly selective and creative in their adoption of foreign ideas, skillfully blending them with their own pre-existing indigenous beliefs and traditions. Local animist beliefs centered on the worship of nature and ancestral spirits were not eradicated but were woven into the new Hindu and Buddhist frameworks. This created unique, syncretic forms of religion and culture that were distinctly Southeast Asian. The result was a rich, spiritual mosaic where a ruler could be a divine Hindu king while the villagers continued their traditional spirit worship, creating a layered and tolerant religious environment that would define the region for centuries to come. While Indian influence was profound, particularly in maritime and mainland Southeast Asia, it was not the only external force shaping the region's early history. In the lands that would one day become Vietnam, a different and more direct cultural current flowed from its powerful northern neighbor, China. For over 1,000 years, from 111 BCE to 938 CE, the Red River Delta, the heartland of Vietnamese civilization, was under direct Chinese rule. This extended period of contact resulted in the deep absorption of Chinese political and social structures, writing systems, and philosophical traditions. Unlike the gradual and voluntary adoption of Indian culture elsewhere, the Chinese influence in Vietnam was often imposed through conquest and administration, creating a distinct cultural trajectory for the Vietnamese people. The legacy of this long interaction is clearly visible in Vietnam's traditional institutions and beliefs. The Vietnamese court adopted Confucianism as its official state ideology, emphasizing social hierarchy, filial piety, and a meritocratic bureaucracy based on civil service examinations, a system borrowed directly from China. Mahayana Buddhism, the form of the religion prevalent in China, also became deeply entrenched in Vietnamese society, coexisting with traditional ancestor worship and Taoist philosophies. This created a cultural sphere in northern Vietnam that was markedly different from its Indianized neighbors in Cambodia and Siam. Even after securing their independence, Vietnamese dynasties continued to look to China as a model for governance and high culture, even as they fiercely resisted any attempts at renewed political domination. By the 8th to 13th centuries, the cultural map of Southeast Asia had become a complex and closely interrelated mosaic. The passage of these world religions and ideas along the historic trade routes had created a shared, if diverse, heritage. Buddhism, in its various forms, became a particularly strong common thread. Theravada Buddhism, which held that enlightenment was an individual pursuit, took root on the mainland, becoming the dominant faith in the pagan empire of Burma, the kingdoms of Siam, and later Cambodia and Laos. The thousands of stupas and temples that still dot the plains of Bagan are a stunning testament to the devotion of the Burmese kings. Meanwhile, Mahayana and the esoteric Vajrayana forms of Buddhism flourished in places like Java and Vietnam, reflecting different streams of influence. Yet, as new faiths arrived, another was quietly making its way into the archipelago via the same trade routes. From the 1200s onward, Arab and Indian Muslim traders introduced Islam to the port cities of maritime Southeast Asia. Initially taking root in northern Sumatra, the faith gradually spread through commerce and conversion, establishing powerful Islamic sultanates in Malacca, Java, Borneo, and the southern Philippines. The rise of the Sultanate of Malacca around 1400 marked a pivotal moment, as it became a thriving hub of Islamic scholarship and trade, accelerating the spread of the new religion. By the dawn of the 15th century, the cultural and religious fabric of Southeast Asia had been forever enriched by these multiple external influences, each one adapted and woven into the unique and resilient tapestry of local traditions. As the classical empires of Angkor and Srivijaya faded, new kingdoms rose to dominate Southeast Asia from the 14th to 18th centuries. 5 major powers emerged: Toungoo in Burma, the Lay in Vietnam, Ayutthaya in Thailand, Majapahit in Java, and Malacca on the Malay Peninsula. These states innovated, centralizing power and shaping the region's future. Their influence radiated outward, overlapping in a fluid system of shifting alliances, trade, and warfare. The Mandala system defined this era, powerful centers with influence that faded at the edges, creating contested frontiers and constant competition. This dynamic world set the stage for the modern nations of Southeast Asia. Conflict was constant as kingdoms vied for control of trade, land, and people. Ayutthaya and Burmese dynasties clashed for centuries, culminating in the destruction of Ayutthaya in 1767, only for the Siamese to rebound and rebuild in Bangkok. Siam and Vietnam competed for dominance over Laos and Cambodia, turning them into buffer states and eventually shared vassals. Vietnam's southward expansion crushed Champa, but also absorbed its culture. In the archipelago, Islamic sultanates like Aceh and Demak rose as Majapahit declined, fighting for control of the spice trade. Despite warfare, trade and diplomacy flourished, as seen in Admiral Zheng He's peaceful voyages. The region's history was shaped by both rivalry and exchange. The 16th century brought European powers seeking spices and wealth, forever altering Southeast Asia. The Portuguese seized Malacca in 1511, opening the door for Dutch, Spanish, British, and French colonizers. The Dutch built the East Indies, Spain ruled the Philippines, Britain took Burma and Malaya, and France created Indochina. Only Siam maintained independence through diplomacy and modernization. Colonial rule imposed rigid borders, exploited resources, and suppressed resistance. The old Mandela system vanished, replaced by European territorial control. These changes set the foundation and the fault lines for the modern states to come. Colonial borders ignored local realities, dividing communities and forcing rivals together. Borneo was split between Dutch and British, the Malay world divided, and mainland frontiers hardened. Economic development favored select cities, deepening internal inequalities. Yet, shared colonial rule sparked new national identities: Burmese, Indonesian, Vietnamese, uniting diverse peoples. Western-educated elites led independence movements, inspired by ideas of self-determination. World War II shattered colonial power as Japanese occupation emboldened local leaders. When the war ended, nationalist movements seized the moment, demanding independence. The end of World War II ignited fierce struggles for independence across Southeast Asia. Indonesia and Vietnam fought bloody wars against Dutch and French attempts to restore colonial rule, ultimately winning freedom after years of conflict. Vietnam's victory at Dien Bien Phu ended French rule and inspired anti-colonial movements worldwide. Elsewhere, independence came through negotiation. Burma, Malaya, the Philippines, Cambodia, and Laos all gained sovereignty in the post-war years. Each new nation faced the daunting task of forging unity from diverse populations within colonial borders. The legacy of colonialism, arbitrary borders, economic disparities, and ethnic divisions posed immense challenges. Yet the region's peoples pressed forward, determined to shape their own destinies. The modern story of Southeast Asia had begun. The first few decades of independence were fraught with peril for the new nations of Southeast Asia. Having thrown off the yoke of foreign rule, they now faced the daunting task of governing themselves while navigating a world deeply divided by the Cold War. The ideological rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union played out dramatically across the region, turning it into a proxy battleground. The most devastating example was the Second Indochina War, better known as the Vietnam War, which engulfed not only Vietnam, but also its neighbors, Laos and Cambodia. This brutal conflict pitted the communist North against the anti-communist South, backed by the United States, causing immense destruction and leaving deep scars that would last for generations. Beyond the shadow of the Cold War, tensions also flared between the newly independent neighbors themselves, often fueled by unresolved territorial claims and nationalistic ambitions left over from the colonial era. A major crisis erupted in 1963 with the formation of the Federation of Malaysia, which merged the former British colonies of Malaya and Singapore with the territories of Sabah and Sarawak on the island of Borneo. Indonesia's President Sukarno vehemently opposed this new federation, viewing it as a neo-colonial plot. He launched a policy of confrontasi, or confrontation, an undeclared low-level war against Malaysia that involved military incursions and diplomatic hostility, poisoning relations between the two neighbors until Sukarno's fall from power in 1966. This period of instability and conflict highlighted a growing realization among some regional leaders. Without a mechanism for dialogue and cooperation, Southeast Asia was at risk of becoming a permanent theater of war, manipulated by outside powers and torn apart by internal rivalries. The end of the confrontasi provided a critical opening for a new approach. The leaders of Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, and Singapore, recognizing their shared vulnerability and common interest in regional stability, decided to set aside their differences and work together. This momentous decision was born from a desire to take control of their own destiny and prevent the region from becoming a pawn in great power games. This shared vision culminated in a historic meeting in Bangkok in 1967. There, the foreign ministers of the five nations signed the Bangkok Declaration, a document that formally established the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. The declaration's language was modest, committing the members to promoting economic growth, social progress, and regional peace. Yet its significance was profound. It marked a deliberate and courageous turn away from the path of confrontation and toward a future of dialogue and mutual respect. ASEAN was founded on the principle that the nations of Southeast Asia could and must solve their own problems, laying the groundwork for an era of unprecedented peace and cooperation among its members. Entering the 21st century, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations stands as a remarkable testament to the power of cooperation in a region once defined by conflict. Building on its initial success in maintaining peace among its members, ASEAN has ambitiously pursued deeper economic integration. The goal is to harness the collective economic might of its more than 650 million people, transforming Southeast Asia into a single cohesive market and production base. This vision led to the creation of the ASEAN Free Trade Area in the 1990s and culminated in the official launch of the ASEAN Economic Community in 2015. These initiatives have successfully reduced tariffs, streamlined trade procedures, and boosted intra-regional investment, making the entire bloc more competitive on the global stage and fostering a powerful interdependence that helps to cement peace. However, beneath this impressive surface of unity and integration, old rivalries and unresolved historical disputes occasionally bubble up, serving as a potent reminder that the region's harmony can never be taken for granted. The most significant and persistent challenge to ASEAN's cohesion is the complex and multi-layered dispute in the South China Sea. 4 ASEAN member states, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei, have overlapping territorial claims with China, which asserts sovereignty over nearly the entire strategic waterway through its expansive 9-dash line. Tensions have escalated significantly in the 2010s as China has built and militarized artificial islands, creating a flashpoint that directly challenges the national interests of several member states and threatens regional stability. ASEAN has attempted to present a united front in managing this dispute, striving to negotiate a legally binding code of conduct with China to prevent conflicts from escalating. However, the bloc's consensus-based approach has sometimes been its Achilles heel, as internal divisions have hampered its ability to take a strong collective stance. China has effectively leveraged its economic influence over certain member states, like Cambodia and Laos, to block strongly worded communiques that criticize its actions. A notable instance occurred in 2012, when ASEAN foreign ministers failed to issue a joint statement for the first time in the organization's history, a failure widely attributed to Cambodia's opposition to mentioning the South China Sea dispute, highlighting the fragility of the bloc's unity when faced with a powerful external actor. Despite these internal fractures, the existence of ASEAN remains critically important. It provides an indispensable platform for its members to collectively engage with China and to manage their own internal disagreements peacefully. Beyond the South China Sea, other border spats persist, such as the periodic diplomatic friction between the Philippines and Malaysia over Sabah, and a past-tense military standoff between Thailand and Cambodia over the Preah Vihear temple complex. The encouraging reality is that these disputes, which in a previous era might have led to open war, are now managed through dialogue, legal arbitration, and the restraining influence of ASEAN's institutional norms. The commitment to amicable settlement remains a cornerstone of the regional order. Beyond territorial disputes, the nations of Southeast Asia also navigate their relationships through softer forms of competition and cooperation, reflecting the complex dynamics of a region with multiple aspiring leaders. There is an implicit yet palpable rivalry between Indonesia and Vietnam for the role of ASEAN's leading voice. Indonesia stakes its claim based on its immense size, its status as a founding member, and its historical role as a regional anchor. Vietnam, on the other hand, puts itself forward based on its fast-growing economy, its strategic importance, and its proven resilience. This quiet competition, however, has not undermined the bloc's solidarity. In fact, it has spurred a new trend of strategic partnerships aimed at addressing shared concerns. A striking example of this new dynamic is the growing rapprochement between Thailand and Vietnam. These two nations, historical adversaries who spent centuries vying for dominance over the mainland, have been driven into a closer diplomatic embrace by a shared wariness of China's expanding influence in their immediate neighborhood. Both Bangkok and Hanoi watch with concern as China's economic and political footprint grows in Laos and Cambodia, two countries they have long considered their strategic backyard. The historical memory of how these smaller kingdoms were once pawns in their 19th century rivalry has made them determined not to see that history repeat itself with a new and far more powerful external player, creating a powerful incentive for them to align their strategies. This balancing act is a microcosm of the single greatest challenge facing ASEAN as a whole, navigating the escalating competition between the United States and China. Virtually every ASEAN member state is caught in a delicate position, seeking to maintain strong economic ties with China, which is now their largest trading partner, while simultaneously welcoming the continued security presence of the United States as a vital counterbalance. The guiding principle for the bloc is ASEAN centrality, an assertion that the region should remain in the driver's seat of its own affairs, setting its own agenda rather than being forced to choose sides in a new Cold War. This is a difficult and precarious path to walk, as increased pressure from either superpower could easily fracture the bloc's consensus. The future of Southeast Asia will be shaped by how well its nations can maintain this delicate balance and uphold their unity in the face of both external pressures and internal challenges. The crisis in Myanmar following the 2021 military coup has severely tested ASEAN's principle of non-interference and its ability to respond effectively to a major political and humanitarian disaster in its own ranks. Shared threats like terrorism, piracy, and transnational crime also demand ever closer cooperation. Ultimately, the story of modern Southeast Asia is the story of ASEAN itself, an ongoing, imperfect but vital experiment in turning a history of division into a future of shared stability and prosperity. The story of Southeast Asia is a sweeping epic of convergence, a journey that has transformed a landscape of rival empires and partitioned colonies into an ambitious community of nations. For centuries, the region's destiny was shaped by external forces and internal conflicts, from the monsoon winds that brought traders and missionaries to the colonial administrators who drew lines on a map. The historical narrative is one of deep and continuous interconnection, woven through the threads of shared religions, overlapping kingdoms, common struggles for independence, and the bitter divisions of the Cold War. This complex past has bequeathed a legacy of both lingering mistrust and profound resilience, creating the foundations upon which the modern regional order is built. The creation of ASEAN marked a pivotal turning point, a conscious decision to choose cooperation over confrontation. In the span of just a few generations, nations that once met on the battlefield began to meet in summit halls, committing to a path of dialogue and consensus, however slow or frustrating that path might sometimes be. This monumental shift has fostered an unprecedented era of peace among its members, allowing for remarkable economic growth and social development. The ASEAN Way has provided a crucial framework for managing disputes and building trust, turning former adversaries into pragmatic partners who recognize their shared interest in a stable and prosperous neighborhood, a truly historic achievement. This does not mean that the animosities of the past have been completely erased. Historical memories run deep, and nationalism can still flare up, particularly when territorial sovereignty is perceived to be at stake. Yet the overarching trend is undeniably one of dialogue and mutual accommodation. As the region navigates the turbulent waters of the 21st century, caught between the competing ambitions of global superpowers and facing existential threats like climate change, its greatest strength lies in the very lesson its long history has taught, that its diverse nations are far stronger and more secure together than they are apart, bound by a shared destiny. By continuing to nurture their hard-won unity amid their rich diversity, the countries of Southeast Asia can strive to ensure that their future chapters are defined not by domination or division, but by collective progress and shared resilience. The journey from ancient crossroads to a modern community is far from over, but it is a testament to the enduring power of cooperation to overcome a legacy of conflict. The path ahead is challenging, yet the region's capacity for adaptation and its commitment to dialogue offer a hopeful vision for a future defined by peace and prosperity for all its peoples.